I'm positive our first guest this evening will have a lot to say about everything I just brought up. Joining us now, he's the former advisor, the defense secretary under Trump, and the CEO of something called Our Country, Our Choice. He'll fill us in on that later. Retired Army Colonel Doug Macgregor. Colonel, welcome back to the program. So many things to bring up between the hostage exchange, the war, the cargo ship. I want to start with the military, though, because at the end of the day, everything we're talking about revolves around possibly going to war, and we need the troops if we're going to be going to war. And we kicked him out for a jab. Now we're begging him to come back. We're forcing this DEI woke training that has nothing to do with military readiness. I mean, you and I have discussed the readiness levels. We're at the lowest we've seen ever, I think, in some of the branches in the history of our nation. And now they're begging him to come back, and nobody wants to go back in. Why the hell would they?
Well, I think the soldier was very eloquent, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, he made it very clear what the problem is. Winston Churchill during World War II used to complain that small mistakes were punished out of all proportion to their significance, but very large mistakes went either unnoticed or were simply ignored. Look, how many general officers are responsible for the debacle in Afghanistan? Mm-hmm. Who are the general officers that were required to plan and execute the withdrawal? Where are they? What has happened to them? They should have been held accountable for what was absolutely a catastrophe in the face of the whole world. So where's McKenzie, the former CENTCOM commander? What about General Milley? What about the 82nd Airborne Division commander? All of those men were involved in the debacle on the airfield. And that cost us, what, $80 billion or more? And now we're going to go after this young soldier for a bill of $500 to $1,000, and he was ultimately told to leave it there? This is absurd. This is an example of no accountability where it absolutely must be imposed, and that's at the senior level.
I got to ask you another one. This headline just blew me away, being an Air Force veteran. Up at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, they literally sent out a text and email alert warning to the troops on that base. They better not go to Trump's rally coming up, or they could, quote, jeopardize their continued service to the country. When in the hell does this country ever tell an American citizen serving it that when they're out of uniform, they can't go practice whatever religion, politics they want to? Because back in my day, and I didn't serve that long ago, 30 years ago, I could say things about Bill Clinton when I was in because I didn't like him as commander-in-chief as long as I was out of uniform. How dare this Air Force base do that? Can you do that legally, Colonel?
No, absolutely not. It's an illegal order. And the individuals that issued it, and I'm fairly confident that that base commander would not have done that if he had not been encouraged to do so at higher levels. But this speaks to something else that everyone in your audience needs to understand. The senior ranks are horribly politicized. Mm-hmm. For the last 30 years, this started under Clinton and has gotten progressively worse. We have been picking people on the basis of everything other than character, competence, and intelligence. Either you're picked because of your race, your gender, or acute lack thereof at this point, or whatever, but it has nothing to do with your demonstrated capabilities or performance. And this is just the latest nail in the cross of the U.S. military. And as you pointed out, our recruiting numbers are terrible. Yeah. We can't field a fighting army right now. And if you can't field a fighting force, you think you're going to fundamentally change anything on the ground in the Middle East, Ukraine, or anywhere else, you're delusional. Yeah. Air and naval power can do many things, but they cannot ultimately change the strategic landscape. You need ground forces for that. We don't have them.
Right, the Marines are the only force that met their recruiting so far for 23 was the Marines. Everybody else is down 20 to 30%. Speaking of it coming from the top brass, Colonel, just this week, Biden requested from the DOD, show this headline, guys, another $114 million to be spent on DEI training for the Pentagon and our troops. I just reported last week that the Pentagon failed their like 6th straight audit. He wants to give them more money for a bunch of this BS training that's doing nothing to ready them for war, which is their job.
Well, the left has always looked at the military not from the standpoint of what it can do or cannot do in terms of military capability and operations. They've always looked at it in terms of how many faces are there that are black or brown or something else. How many women can we shove into these various jobs? In other words, we're trying to make the military look like their delusion concerning what America is all about. The focus on having something that can rapidly deploy and fight and defend our own country, it's not up for discussion. So we're at the end of a 31, 32-year process that has left us with a very weak force. And the rest of the world knows that we're weak. That's what people in the United States don't understand. It's very obvious that we're weak. And sadly, you know, when President Trump was in there, he figured it out, despite the fact that he was lied to repeatedly by everybody, including the people at the top of the military.
Right.
He figured out what the problem was. He also said, we need to get those troops out of Iraq and Syria, because he looked at them, there are only a few thousand, and he recognized that they were very vulnerable. The only thing that we could do in the event of an emergency was to commit air power. But air power is not going to be enough if the Turks, the Iranians, and others become directly involved. So he was right on that. And we haven't even begun to discuss the larger picture involving Turkey, where we have bases, as you know.
Right.
And those bases are one step away from being surrounded and the people on them becoming hostages, depending upon what the Turkish government decides to do about Israel.
Wow, yeah. And now we know there may be a ceasefire for a few days if they can exchange these prisoners while the Iranian-backed forces in Syria and Iraq are still hitting our boys and girls over there. what was the number? 64 attacks since mid-October. We've done what now? 3 or 4 missions hitting them back? That's about it. If you were in charge, what would you be doing in the region right now, Colonel? That's my final question to you.
Well, to be frank with you, I'd get them out. I mean, these men in uniform are in a position very similar to the Marines on Wake Island or the soldiers in the Philippines in 1942. You know, we shouldn't have left them where they were. We should have gotten them out as well. We were unable to do so. They all ended up as prisoners of war, and we know what happened to them in the hands of the Japanese. Now, I think Americans will say, well, that looks like we're retreating. Well, it looks like we're being rational because we place value on American life, whether it's in uniform or not. What are we expecting them to do? By the way, what are they doing there? Why are they there at all? These are the questions that need to be answered. Yep,
great point. Colonel, you got a new endeavor. I'm going to plug it for you. I think this is a show you're doing now, right? OurCountryOurChoice.com. And I saw you doing some interviews on there. If you want to check out Colonel Macgregor, hit him up on Twitter. It's @DougMacGregor. And then check out OurCountryOurChoice.com. Or pardon me, OurCountryYourChoice.com. Let me get it right. Colonel Doug Macgregor, thank you, sir.
No, you had it right. It's OurCountryOurChoice.com. And on Wednesday night at 7:30, they're going to broadcast a 40-minute interview that I did with RFK Jr.
Oh, okay.
And I think people will find it interesting.
Well, Colonel, we always find you interesting. You are a plethora of knowledge. You call it like you see it, and you keep it real. That's why I like having you on the program. Take care, Colonel.
Thank you.
Yep, God bless. Happy Thanksgiving.